All right, so hopefully you have a caffeinated drink because there is no way to make grammar more interesting than it actually is. The only thing that I can stress to you is I find that if we're able to understand sentence construction on a basic level, we're able to eliminate about 80% of the grammatical issues we have in our papers. So while it might not be super interesting, it is super relevant to your educational career and your professional career if you are a para um, or a teacher or any sort of profession that requires you to work through writing. So please try your best to ask questions if something is unclear for you, and also take notes so that you can reuse this information later on. So, sentence construction. Sentence construction is important because in order to understand why you have a run on, why you have a fragment, why your words are in the incorrect order, you need to understand on a basic level how sentences are formed. So, in order to do that, you need to understand the different parts of a sentence. There are clauses. Clauses basically make up a complete sentence. Multiple clauses can make up a complete sentence. You can have a singular clause make up a sentence, but you want to be familiar with the phrase or the word, sorry, clauses. Clauses basically are a bunch of words that show a relationship between a subject and a verb. And again, a subject would be a noun, a person, place, thing, or idea, and a verb would be an action. So the thing to see here is these both are clauses. The dog barked, right? So you get the dog as the subject, barked as the verb. The here is an article, but dog, subject, barked, verb. So you get that this dog is performing this action. Then we have another clause, while the dog was barking. Now you might have noticed this first example feels like a complete sentence because it is. This second example is an incomplete sentence because of this word while, which we'll talk about a little later on. The important thing to notice though is clauses can be both complete and incomplete. The same thing, though, or sorry, there are the same subjects here, dog and bark, yet this is complete and this is incomplete. So there are two different kinds of clauses. I alluded to this earlier. There's the independent clause. Independent clauses can stand on their own. So there's still the subject verb, but there's no need for additional information. So if you read through some of these examples, our planets revolve around the sun. Our planets, right, is the subject, and revolve is the action. So based on this construction, we feel it's a complete sentence. Because of that, we know it's an independent clause. These are some more examples. Okay, so there's the first kind of issue that occurs is when you have independent clauses, right? And that is sentences or clauses that can stand on their own. And you're trying to connect two sentences that can stand on their own into one sentence. So when that happens, you have a bunch of different options. You can connect these two clauses using a conjunction, a comma, and a conjunction. Conjunction means one of the fanboys. Now, this should be familiar to those of you who took English 111 and 121. Fanboys is for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. One more time. For, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. In other words, you have two independent clauses and you want to connect them. You can do that by using a comma in between the two independent clauses alongside one of these fanboys. The other option you have is connecting two independent clauses using a semicolon, and a semicolon is not the two dots, but the dot and then the comma. a semicolon and what's known as a conjunctive adverb. And those, the two that are the most popular are however and therefore. You can also connect two independent clauses using just a semicolon, but I don't recommend that because there are a lot of instructors who feel like semicolons should really only be used when all other options are not appropriate. And then the final option you have is just using a period. So separating two independent clauses using a period. So you don't have that worksheet that you completed for me last week, but when you get it back next week, you'll see a lot of you got some sentences wrong or some answers wrong because you didn't follow these strategies, which is fine because we didn't talk about them. But now you know you want to use a comma alongside a fanboy or a semicolon with a conjunctive adverb and then a comma following, or just a semicolon or a period. And here are some examples. I went to sleep late, so you'll see that's an independent clause. It can stand on its own. I am tired. Independent clause, stand on its own. So I'm going to connect these two by using the comma and the fanboys. This one is so. Other option. I went to sleep late, semicolon, conjunctive adverb. Oh, there should be a comma here. Whoops. Let's see if I can fix that right now. Maybe not. Okay. Should be therefore like that. All right. There we go. Like nothing ever happened. I went to sleep late, semicolon, therefore, comma, I am tired. And then the other option I showed you is I went to sleep late, period, I am tired. So you see these are all three possible options. The mistake that a lot of us made is we had I went to sleep late and then we didn't use the fanboys. We just put comma, I am tired. That actually would be a grammatical error known as a comma splice. The comma is not strong enough to handle two independent clauses. It needs the assistance of a fanboy. That's why it's so important. These are just some other conjunctive adverbs that you could use when you're using a semicolon and a comma, right? So you can use accordingly, besides, consequently, etc., etc. I like to have these words on the side as I'm writing a paper, just because sometimes I get sick of saying therefore. Okay. These are some other examples. Again, the clown frightened the little girl, complete, right? And then we have she ran off screaming, complete. And so to connect them, I use the comma and the fanboy. This one is and. All right, I think I've made this clear. Okay, so we talked about independent clauses. And I told you that, you know something's independent because it can stand on its own. But one thing that happens quite often is I'll give that lesson and then someone will say, well, I feel like everything can stand on its own. I don't really know what you mean when you say I should feel it, right? And so because of that, I started talking about dependent clauses. So the way to know whether or not you have an independent clause in front of you is to make sure it's not doing anything that dependent clauses do, right? And so how can you know that? Well, we're going to go through what dependent clauses look like, and what I hope will happen is you'll look at your sentences and you'll ask yourself, are you doing what dependent clauses do? If so, I need to make sure that I'm connecting you to an independent clause, or I am fixing you so that you are an independent clause. Because dependent clauses, just like dependent people, cannot live on their own. They cannot exist on their own. They need the support of an independent clause, or they become fragments. Okay. So what are the different kinds of dependent clauses? We have noun clauses, adverb clauses, and adjective clauses. Noun clauses are dependent because essentially all it is the subject of the sentence. It's tricky because it seems like there are a bunch of different words and verbs in this clause, but if you were to ask yourself the purpose of the series of words. It is simply to tell you the subject. Adverb clauses, same thing in that it's deceptive. You think that it's a complete sentence, but all it's doing is telling us a little bit more about the verb of the sentence. And adjective clauses are only telling us about the subject of the sentence. Now, the noun clause is the subject, the adjective clause modifies the subject. So, telling us if someone is short, someone is tall, if the idea is brilliant, right? Those are things that would count as adjective clauses. Just to recap, noun clauses are person, place, thing, or idea. I mean, that's what a noun is. Adverb is when you're modifying a verb, right? You're telling me how fast someone ran, when you're telling me how loud someone spoke, right? Those are adverbs. Adjectives modify nouns, they're descriptive words that surround subjects. Okay, so here are some noun clause examples. What I had for breakfast gave me heartburn. Now, notice, right? The had makes you think, okay, so this is a complete sentence because what I had for breakfast, the had is the verb and I is the subject. But because we have this what here, it becomes simply the subject of the sentence. In other words, you can replace this with eggs. Eggs gave me heartburn. What I had for breakfast gave me heartburn. The verb of this sentence is the gave. That's why this on its own becomes dependent. Now, if nothing's sticking right now, and if what I'm saying is going completely over your head, another way to remember this is if you have these W words, right? What, who, which, whether, that, if, those are not W words, but they still are part of this. If you have those words starting your sentence, you just want to be mindful you have a dependent clause on your hands. So you want to make sure that after the dependent clause, there is clarification of the full idea or a complete thought that follows it. So what I had for breakfast, if you saw that you have a period there, you would want to say, okay, well, that can't be a complete sentence. So what verb should I add to make it clear? What the English teacher said was downright inspiring. Again, what is this clause doing? Well, it's just telling me the subject of the sentence. And so because of that, this whole thing becomes the noun clause. The students don't know whether or not they can stay awake during the lecture. Again, whether or not they can stay awake during the lecture is still so it's not the subject of the sentence because the subject is students, but it is the object of the sentence. In other words, what don't the students know? They don't know this. And because I can replace this entire clause with this, that makes it a noun clause. All right. Adverb clauses. Adverb clauses, you'll remember, again, modify the verb of the sentence. It tells me when the verb is going to happen, under what conditions the verb can happen, how the verb can happen. So wherever there is music, people will often dance. Dancing is the verb. When will these people dance? Well, they'll dance wherever there is music. And so that makes this part right here the adverb clause. That also means if you didn't have this and you just had wherever there is music, period, this would be a fragment. It would be incorrect. So to resolve this issue, what I did is I added a comma and a complete clause, an independent clause. People will often dance. Dependent, comma, independent. All alone, it would be a fragment. Now, I think you should go through each of these examples and see if you can note where the adverb clause is, either as a comment here, or maybe we'll talk about this a little bit in class next week. But it's useful to know how to spot out the adverb clauses so that you know whether or not they're dependent or independent. The other thing is you'll notice the same words sort of show up again, the if, the when. I don't think I had after here, no. But after is a signal for an adverb clause. Then we have adjective clauses. Again, modifies the subject or the pronoun of the sentence. So Diane felt manipulated by her beagle Santana, whose big brown eyes pleaded for another cookie. The only purpose of this clause right here is to give me more information about this beagle. You'll also see it has the whose, right? The W word. That means this is dependent. It can't exist on its own. Okay. So if you can understand these different clauses, then you can avoid the other enemy of sentence structure, and that is fragments. Here are some sentences that I want you to read through and see which ones are the fragments, which ones are okay. Let's do some together. When Sammy discovers the empty carton of vanilla ice cream. So hopefully some of you are yelling at me right now and saying, this is a fragment, and you're absolutely right. The reason why this is a fragment is because the when, right, that should indicate to us that this clause is dependent. It's a fragment. The other thing is you'll see if you're sort of now an expert on these different clauses that all this is actually an adverb clause. When Sammy discovers the empty carton of vanilla ice cream, comma, something must happen, and we want to know what. He will explode with anger. That's complete, so that's totally fine. Sorry. Jeanne engrossed in another trashy romance novel. Now, this one actually is incomplete, but for none of the rules that we talked about. This one is incomplete because we have the subject, but without the helping verb is or are, here it would be is. This subject is not actually linked to this part of the sentence, so it seems as though we have a word and then a clause that's really just an action, and we don't understand the relationship that these two things have to one another. So to fix it, you would want Jeanne is engrossed in another trashy romance novel. Or Jeanne engrossed in another trashy romance novel, comma, got hit by a car. Right? So if this is just supposed to modify Jeanne, that's fine. But then what we need is a comma and then the actual verb clause that you want to clarify what happens to Jeanne. Okay, if you skip down here, if he wants Mimi to forgive him for flirting with Helen. So we have if, which means something's going to be a little fishy here. If he wants Mimi to forgive him for flirting with Helen, comma, something has to happen. So this is dependent. This is a fragment. The other way you know it's a fragment is because technically it's another adverb clause. If he wants Mimi to forgive him, comma, this thing must happen. So what I have here are some fragments that you should go through, and then what I have here are some sentences that I wanted you to correct. So you can pause here and look through these and see if you can correct them. And then magic of YouTube is I'm going to click here, and then these are the corrected versions. All of these examples, though, are run-on sentences, and so I've corrected them using the same strategies I gave you a few slides back. Okay, so that about does it for our lesson on sentence structure. What I hope you do is you write down some of the basic rules that you've learned, but then also some of the questions you still have. And then next class, I'm going to give you back your grammar worksheets, and you're going to correct your responses based on what you've just learned today. That's going to really be your exit ticket out of class next week. So you want to make sure that you are clear on how sentence structure works. And congratulations, we have officially done everything that's required to make up for our missed class on Tuesday. So I'll see you soon.